In Australia, where it started, shed is like a meeting place. It's not where you put your lawnmower. It's actually a place where guys get together. And so a men's shed, there's 3,000, as Robert said, and everyone is different. They could be meeting in a coffee. They could be meeting in Tim Hortons to start with, or they could be meeting in a huge place.
Welcome to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario's podcast, Aging Vibrantly, Conversations to Empower Seniors. I'm Rayanne Rideout, the host of the show, where we amplify the voices of seniors who impart their expertise and wisdom to enhance our understanding of aging issues and ways of living a safe and fulfilling life with respect and dignity. You know, as we age, maintaining relationships and community connections becomes increasingly critical in combating loneliness and isolation, which can have serious health consequences, including an increased risk of mortality, heart disease, stroke, and even dementia. The epidemic of social isolation and loneliness is rapidly spreading globally. According to the World Health Organization's Commission on Social Connections 2025 report, From Loneliness to Isolation Connections, Charting a Path to Healthier Societies, they state 1 in 6 people worldwide are affected. That includes older people. Let's just think about that number, 1 in 6. Well, let's look what's happening in Canada. Last year, as many as 43% of Canadians 50 years of age and older were at risk of social isolation, and 59% experienced some degree of loneliness, according to the National Institute of Aging's 2024 Aging in Canada survey. Isolation and loneliness are increasingly being recognized as a public health priority and policy issues across all age groups, including older people. This startling evidence calls for urgent, scalable actions for policymakers and all sectors to treat social health with the same priority as physical and mental health. A unique and growing movement that is gaining attention and interest to address loneliness and isolation among older men in Canada that I am thrilled to talk to you today about is men's sheds. For many men, aging and retirement can lead to loneliness and a loss of purpose, and that's where men's sheds come in. In this episode, you will learn how sheds are making significant impacts to strengthen both men's lives and their communities, and how these grassroots initiatives are playing a vital role in providing older men with a safe and supportive space in their local communities to build friendships and connect with their peers where they are finding renewed purpose, engaging in community activities that is reducing the risk of social isolation and its negative impacts on their mental and physical health. By the end of this episode, we hope that you're inspired to start a men's sheds in your community. So who better to give us the facts and details than the president of Men's Sheds, Robert Golick, and Brian Sawyer, the operations manager. They are our guests today. They both have been very involved in the creation of Men's Sheds and will share their expertise and experiences of being involved in the sheds and inform you on how you can get involved. So let me first formally introduce our guests. Robert Golick is the president of Men's Sheds Canada. He grew up in northwestern Quebec and spent most of his career in leadership positions at colleges in Ontario, Alberta, and Manitoba, as well as with the government of Manitoba. Robert also worked part-time in media as a journalist and radio broadcaster. A firm believer in giving back to the community, he served on boards on many nonprofit organizations, including as chair of the Prairie Region Citizen Advocacy Committee with Corrections Canada, for which he was recognized nationally with the James A. Murphy Award of Excellence. In 2017, Robert moved to Squamish, BC, and looking for potential volunteer opportunities, he stumbled on the Squamish Men's Shed. Since then, he served as the president, as well as the vice president of the Men's Sheds Association of BC, and now the president of Men's Sheds Canada. In 2021, he chaired and hosted the first provincial Men's Sheds Conference in Squamish, BC. Along with Robert is Brian Sawyer, the operational manager of Men's Sheds. Brian has been involved in organizational development for over 4 decades with provincial and federal government agencies. With a master's in science and earth sciences, he lectured for 10 years at the University of Alberta and now supports education for seniors with Edmonton's Lifelong Learners Association. Brian has always devoted time to nonprofit sectors, receiving a Volunteer of the Year award from the United Way of Edmonton in 2021. He had been involved in men's wellness programs for 25 years with the Mankind Project and 5 years with the Men's Sheds Association of Edmonton and Men's Sheds Canada. He is passionate about helping create a vibrant community of thriving sheds across Canada. Brian is your first point of contact and all general inquiries about men's sheds. So welcome both of you to our podcast today. I am also joined with my co-host, Sherry Baker, a member of our Senior Advisory Committee. So thank you all for joining me. I am so looking forward to this conversation about your innovative programs offered through Men's Sheds Canada. Okay, so thank you, Robert and Brian and Sherry, for joining us today. I am so eager to learn more about the Men's Sheds Canada. When I first learned about the program, I thought, what a great idea. It's so amazing, especially for men, because sometimes we don't hear about men being involved in many social programs such as this. And there's so many benefits from this that people gain from being involved in the Men's Shed. So I hope by the end of this interview that some of our listeners will learn more about the program, get engaged wherever they live across Canada and join and participate because there's such remarkable benefits for those who participate in the Med Shed. So I'm going to turn it over to Sherry to start off our conversation so our listeners can get a better understanding of some basic information about Men's Sheds and how they began.
Thanks, Rayanne. First of all, I'd just like to generally, and you two can decide who's going to answer. What is the purpose of the shed?
Well, why don't I start, and maybe Brian can add if he wants. But so last week, I was flying to a gerontology conference in Montreal, and I was sitting beside a lady. We had a nice conversation, and after the conversation, she turned around to me. She says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a volunteer with Men's Sheds." And then she looks at me, and her jaw drops. She says, "What the heck is that?" So, I spent the next 15, 20 minutes explaining to her what Men's Sheds is all about. And if I can give you just a little bit of history, and she was quite interested in where it all originated, it started in South Australia by a lady whose name was Maxine Chaseling. And she founded the first shed in 1993. And the reason behind finding the shed is quite interesting. Her father developed a heart condition. And as a result of the heart condition, he developed depression. And as a result of his depression, he couldn't work. He decided to retire. After he retired, he didn't know what to do. And his daughter did not know what to do with him. So she came up with this concept called Men's Shed. And it's a brilliant concept, very simple. It has 3 components to it: someone to talk to, somewhere to go, and something to do. And it doesn't get easier than that. And the concept is almost magical and has tremendous benefits to those who join it. So globally right now, I think the guy he would not believe what happened after, his passing away or her passing away, what she was able to do globally. Right now, we have over 3,000 sheds in 17 different countries. In Canada, we have about 170 sheds, and we're only like 2.5 years old. We're still evolving. We're a very young organization. And, 170 sheds in 2.5 years, that's pretty good. And the first shed was started in Winnipeg by a guy called Doug Mackey, and it was at Woodhaven Community Club in Winnipeg. And believe it or not, I was there when it first started, but I never heard of it. When I moved to Squamish years later, I was looking for something to do, and I came across a newspaper ad that identified about 130 different nonprofit organizations. And I said, I got to find something to do here. I spent most of my adult life being a volunteer. And, after retiring, you want to do something. And so men's sheds came up and I said, oh, here's a chance to learn carpentry skills. So I went to the shed. Oh, must have gone there 13 times. It was always closed. And I thought it was fictitious. I said, I gave up. Then one day coming back from a grocery store, the door was open. I popped in, had a look, talked to 3 guys. Unfortunately, they asked me what my background was. I told them I was, working in government and other volunteer organizations. And they said, come and join us. Help us get some grants. Help us get some money and all that. And then, so I got hooked on it. And Men's Shed has been an important part of my life for the past 3 years. I've done it at the local level. I've been president of our local shed for 4 or 5 years. Then I became the vice president of the provincial association. And now I'm entering my 3rd final year as president of Men's Sheds Canada. I just want to add one other little thing, and that is the provincial associations. We have 5 of them right now in British Columbia, in Alberta, in Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec. We're hoping to get a 6th one in Atlantic Canada. But these provincial associations are so critical to the acceleration of sheds. They are the ones that really help us start new sheds. And we as a national organization are trying to support them the best way we can so that we can get as many sheds started across Canada.
That's fabulous. I mean, it seems like you're, I think there's so many already, and trying to get, the smaller grassroots organizations, give them the information and how they can get started. I think that's tremendous to continue that growth and beyond. Brian, did you have anything else that you wanted to contribute for that?
Sure. I would add that people, when I mention men's sheds, which is often, people ask, well, do you work in a shed? And that's not no. In Australia, where it started, shed is like that meeting place. It's not where you put your lawnmower. It's actually a place where guys get together. And so a men's shed, there's 3,000, as Robert said, and everyone is different. They could be meeting in a coffee. They could be meeting at Tim Hortons to start with, or they could be meeting in a huge place. But what's common is it's men getting together because we enjoy each other's company, and we like to get together. And previously, we were probably isolated, like I was when I retired. I retired out of a government job where I knew hundreds of people into. I thought nothingness was going to be great. It didn't turn out that way. So after a few months, I was looking around for something to do and found men's sheds. But it's, that we're all small or large groups of men get together somewhere. And often then after a while, the collegial part of it works into we want to do something in the community. So we end up building benches or just painting the food bank or something like that. We sort of get involved in the community. That's the natural evolution of a men's shed, but it really just starts with 2 or 3 guys getting together and saying, well, we want to keep meeting and we have fun. I just want to say that from the beginning, and I'll say it from the end. No matter the mental health benefits, we enjoy each other's company, and so we have fun.
That's important.
So it doesn't have to be a physical space that that starts off with. Like you say, you could just meet at Tim Hortons, which we see a lot of, that's one coffee place, but we see a lot of people meet on a regular basis, but maybe don't take it beyond that. But even just having coffee is enough just to fill that void, as you talk about social isolation and that emptiness that sometimes people feel, I think, when, the retirement, because that loss of community that you have a day-to-day, you go in, you have social network, and then you kind of lose that, or that sense of loss of a role. That this is because that first thing that everybody asks you when you meet somebody is like, what do you do? Right. And if you're retired and filling that void is like, now I've been involved. It's something else that, takes up that space. So you are connected and keep that going in your own life. I think so important.
So
go ahead, Sherry.
Who can join a men's shed? I mean, is it just little, guys on the street? I mean, how do you qualify for membership?
Well, I'll let Brian answer that one. He's
guys can join a men's shed. There's I think there's anybody who works in that with seniors knows that, and so we're not restricted to seniors, but a lot of our guys are retired, and most seniors programs, the women tend to show up quite often, and the men don't, and that relates back to how the first shed was started. The organizer had all kinds of programs for men, but the guys were sitting in their parked cars waiting for their wives to come back, I think. And she said, well, why the heck don't you go out in the shed and do something? And they did. And that was the beginning. So you just have to be a guy. Lots of us are old, but we have younger guys who come in. The president of my shed association is 35 and the vice president is 45. We meet on a Saturday so the working guys can come in. But it's mostly guys who want to get together and maybe for some reason they're in the community. We're a community-based program. That's what we are. So it's guys getting together in person, meeting eye to eye, building something, and eventually building up trust. And that's a really important thing for men to open up. We need to know each other for a little while before we start to open up. And so we work on projects. We use the term shoulder to shoulder. We do stuff together. And eventually we chat about how it's going with the grandkids or what's up with the family or things like that. But it's that camaraderie that comes about by working on something together. And we don't, every man is welcome. We have an 18-year-old in my shed and we have a 94-year-old. So, yeah.
So what about cultural diversity? Our communities are quite diverse. Are the sheds also diverse, or are there sheds that are designed to attract people of similar, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's Indigenous or whatever it might be, other diversity?
Well, I can take a shot at that. I know Brian will want to add to it, but if we take a look at our mission, vision, value statement, which is on our website, inclusiveness and diversity is a real important principle for us, to follow. And we encourage that throughout our men's shed system. In fact, we hired a consultant to help us develop a DEI strategy that we could implement across the whole system. And we learned a lot from that. And we also we've offered a DEI webinar. Even in our applications, grant application, we ask a question. So how will this contribute to diversity and inclusiveness? Will your project contribute to that? And how will it contribute to that? We have an impact video that we've developed. It's an 11-minute thing that speaks to diversity and inclusiveness and so on. And it has people from, various groups represented in that video to give you an idea of what men's sheds really are all about across Canada, and that we do welcome, everyone. I have to say that sheds are autonomous. They're independent entities. They are the ones that determine, membership criteria. And so no shed is alike, as Brian said earlier. They're all very different. They all have different objectives and so on. And in terms of women, for example, like Men's Sheds Canada, until just recently, we had a woman on our board of directors. She was our treasurer for 2 years. She stepped down now. Our executive director, for example, is a woman, Barbara McMillan. You probably know her, doing a fantastic job for us. And so, we try to promote diversity and inclusiveness throughout the system, through example, but also through webinars and education. And, when we meet face to face between our board and the boards of the provincial associations, for example, we speak to that. So how's it going? What are the challenges? How can we help you support? How can we support you, to get a better DEI program in place and so on? All of these things take a long time. They're like little journeys. And you have to educate people, you have to work with them, you have to support them. But eventually it'll all happen, and I think we're still only 2.5 years old, as I said, so we have a long way to go. But, we're we're doing reasonably okay, I would think. And I know Brian in his corner, he's got an immigrant group that has a shed, and what else, Brian, that you have in that your corner of the world there?
Well, I'm from Alberta, and so uh, what I will say is that some sheds, like in central Alberta, some of the farming communities, they say, yes, we're diverse. We have both farmers and ranchers. And so that's just, that in their world, there are two different, so that is diversity. Here in Edmonton, and a more culturally, we have lots of immigrants. So we have an East Indian shed, for example, and they started out all Hindu, but they say, well, yeah, we diversify after I said, so are you diversifying? Yes, we've got Sikhs in our group as well. and so, we have to be culturally sensitive to who the group is, and we promote openness all the time. Every man should be welcome in your group, and we make that one of our values. But of course, men start with common interests. So we don't all like to do woodworking. So the East Indian men like to put on feasts and dances. It's a cultural event. It's a cultural shed. They literally call themselves the cultural shed. So we have quite a diverse group of sheds across this country. But, the principle of openness and diversity is something that we hold strongly to when men join us and become members. And when sheds apply for a grant, we have to reinforce that openness.
That's amazing. I mean, I think that's so important, and so anybody can join that. So again, if our listeners are out there and want to know where to go, I mean, and to want to get involved, I think that's so important. It sounds like just from speaking, I can see the passion in both of your voices when you're speaking about the men's sheds. So just has it changed your life in any way in terms of since you've joined the men's sheds?
Yeah, I think that I before, when I retired from work, I had bought into some sort of the idea that I'm now on the downward slide towards an old age home, that I've finished my life and I should just maybe relax, but not really have a purpose. And what I've learned now, no, I'm just in the last quarter, and the last quarter of my life is going to be the best one. And we repurpose ourselves. So it's actually quite energizing. And to see men get together who come in the door, maybe feeling lonely, maybe feeling like, well, I'll give it a shot, but what am I going to get out of it? And then 3 months down the road, this is the highlight of their week. And they show up and we say, well, how's it going with your kid or your son? It's repurposing. It's a re-energizing of men in our 60s, because 60s and 70s and 80s, we realize we have lots of energy, we have wisdom, we have the life experience we want to share, and then the younger men come in the door. They want a piece of that. There's a lot of younger men could use some mentoring. And so this multi-generational aspect of our work becomes really important. Men so much want to share what they've learned and what they know with younger men. So that's the older men perspective I'm giving you. We have lots of younger men too. But I have the more sheds, and I'm lucky I get to be in touch with many, many sheds across Canada. Those guys are so darn excited about getting together and becoming a group and almost creating a new family. So yeah, the energy levels are way up from when I first started.
Well, that's great. And Robert?
Oh, absolutely. It has impacted on my life. There's no question about that. I took aging for granted. I didn't really understand it really, really well. You're always busy, not thinking about it. And then all of a sudden, when you retire, you find out, well, what's next, And what happens if you don't do anything? You start worrying, you start getting depressed. When you start depressed, you maybe start drinking, taking drugs, then you develop some kind of an illness, and and then on and on and on. And that's usually what happens, and men are really funny about not going to the doctor or not sharing their problems with their wives and partners. And so it leads to all kind of complications. And I kind of took all of that for granted, until I went to a shed and saw what a difference it made in their lives. So like men's sheds not only saves lives, but it changes lives. It's not transactional, it's transformational. And that had a tremendous impact on me. And, like we are a working board up to now. So we did a lot of the work to get the infrastructure for the national organization going. We've hired staff to help us, and we're going to transition into a governing board. But I have to tell you that seeing the impact of a shed on men, every time I go to a shed, I see a difference. Or I witness incredible benefits to men, no matter which shed you visit. I mean, I can give you an example of one that was not very, so they knew that, I was coming there as the president of Men's Sheds Canada. And so, I just sat down. And as soon as I sat down besides the shedder, who I had never met before, he taps me on the shoulder and he looks at me, and he says, "Men's Shed saved my life." And then he stops, he hits me on the shoulder again, and he says, "Men's Sheds saved my life." And then he tells me the story of his life, developed cancer, depression, ready to commit suicide, and on and on and on. And by joining the shed, he turned his life completely around. Social isolation was reduced. His loneliness was reduced. He belonged to a group. His identity came back. He was able to share a skill that he had, and he was a great carver and took great pride in the things that he was able to carve and sell and generate revenue for the shed. And on and on. So, the positive health effects, mental health, and even well-being, physical effects of a shed on members is incredible. And that's just one example. I'll give you another quick one if we have time. So
For sure.
another shedder just was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer at home. He hasn't heard about the sheds. He didn't hear about the sheds. His wife found out about it. And he was moaning and groaning and being depressed and saying, "Oh, how am I going to live with this? I'm going to die. I got nothing to live for." And he kept to himself, and he was a miserable guy with his family and his wife and so on. And isolated himself, and his wife said, "Go to the shed, do something." And so finally he broke down and went. And over a course of a month or two, he was sitting beside another shedder working on a community build project, which he had skills for. And so, when your hands are busy and you're shoulder to shoulder, people are relaxed and they come into a conversation, a natural conversation. And so how are you doing? "Oh, I'm doing fine." "Yeah, so what's new?" "Well, geez, I was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer, if you can believe it, of all things. And it really bothers me. I'm scared stiff, and I'm a real bother to my family and friends, and on and on, And the guy's listening. He says, "Well, you know what? I just went through that last year. Can I tell you, how I approached it? And can I tell you that you don't have to worry as much as you do? And, we're here to support you. And, we're going to be your friends. We'll go through that whole process. Don't think negative, think positive. You'll get through it, and we'll be there to help you." And, in Scotland, so like what I'm saying is social intervention is just as effective and not more effective than medical intervention.
Michael.
And, Scotland coined a very interesting term called shedicine, sheds medicine. They combined the two. Here's an example of shedicine, So, there's a lot of magic in a shed. And I see that almost every time I go into a shed, and I'm sure Brian does as well. So it's a great place. It's a really, really great place. And, we have 6.2 million men, 50 plus in Canada, and about 3.25, 65 plus. And we know that the suicide rate amongst the highest, amongst the eldest, 65 plus, is very, very high. We know that 44% of men die prematurely because of and the diseases that they are, the illness they had could have been prevented. And this is a November 2025 report that came to that conclusion. So there's lots that we can do and save a lot of men and save a lot of money on a health system as well. You know, for every dollar that we invest into a shed, there was a study done in Scotland, they saved $6 or $7. We're not there yet. We're only 2.5 years old, but we are going to do a lot of research into that area, the impact of sheds on the community, on the members, and on health economics. And we will talk to the government and say, look, here's a real good return on your investment. Scotland and Ireland are doing that, pumping millions and millions of dollars every year to make sure that men's sheds exist, new men's sheds, and strengthening existing sheds. Those are really important remedies for older men, well, for all men, but especially older men. And we have a little bit of, we have some way to go, but we're going to get there.
And the other group that are benefiting from this are the families. I can just imagine, if your husband is a woman, if your husband is going through that terrible time,
yes,
and how hard he must be to live with.
Or as a son or a daughter or a brother or an uncle, or,
Yeah.
I'm telling you, to see a difference in their lives, that, they're thinking a little more positively. They've managed to turn things around from where they were before. It's like a little miracle, I'm telling you, it's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why I and Brian and others are volunteers. Well, Brian's not a volunteer, with Men's Sheds Canada, with Men's Sheds. It's really important. We want to make a difference in the lives of men, and this is a really nice way to do it.
I was mentioning that I love the word Shedison, because I think it's exactly what you're saying, Robert. Yeah. It's, the benefits of people don't maybe even visually see, especially the emotional impact, the loneliness, isolation, the feeling of depression. You can't see it on the outside, but you can feel it on the inside. Even just telling me those stories, I was already emotional, right? And so the impact that it just translates across, it has a ripple effect, I think, not only for those who are experiencing it, for those who are around them as well. And I also attended that conference in Montreal for the Canadian Gerontology Conference, and I attended the workshop that you were both at, Robert was at. And one of the quotes when you were doing the presentation that stood out for me was one of the participants said, I was somebody, then I was a nobody, and now I am a somebody again, which kind of just reinforces that fact that I think were talking about, Brian, about feeling that connectedness, that belonging. So how might Men's Shed sort of build on that social confidence of people that they might lose?
Yeah, so that's a big one, because it's so subtle, but it's insidious. So just use my example, but I retired, as I said, from knowing hundreds of people and talking daily to them, even and running into them in the elevator, to then being on my own. And after being on my own for a month or two, I was no longer so quick to respond. I was kind of in my own world, and I had lost all of that purpose that I had. I knew where I was in the organization and what roles I played and what relationships I had. So my purpose was clear then. And as a retiree, my purpose was not so clear. And a lot of men say that to me, a lot of men who come out of whatever the work they is. And sometimes it's being a truck driver. Well, they had big connections, or they come from the military and they knew where they fit in the military. But now they're in a community and they're just a person. Well, who am I? And that's pretty common for me to hear people say. And when they come into the shed and we start talking, I want to hear their story. Other men want to hear their stories. And it turns out we've especially the older guys, have survived a heck of a long time. We've gone through a lot of trauma, and we've turned our wounds into scars. And therefore that's where wisdom comes from. And so we start sharing our wisdom in the Men's Shed. And that's when men start to identify with each other. So Robert's very touching story about the man who had cancer, thought he was in this by himself, shared it, and then realized he's not by himself. other men have gone through this. So I have another man who just wants to join a shed, but he said, unfortunately, my wife has just gotten cancer, so I got to get through that first, and then I'll come to join the shed. And I said, no, no. We have probably 5 guys in this shed who've gone through this experience. We're here to help you. You're not in this by yourself. So come and talk to us when you're ready. We're here for you. And he was so appreciative of that, because it's true. When men start talking about our issues, and we do have issues, and we don't want to burden our wives sometimes, but in the group, we start to share our issues, and other guys put up their hand and say, I know exactly what you're talking about. Then they're not alone. And then the weight lifts like by about 50% right away. So that's so huge. And then we start talking and we start getting together. And it didn't matter whether they were a truck driver or a doctor or a government bureaucrat like myself. We're all men. And we want to, what do we want to do now with our lives? And knowing that some of us are wounded, or some of us are imperfect. We're all imperfect. But what are we going to do now? And we find all sorts of wonderful things to do in the community. That's where the purpose comes in. That's when it's so different from watching TV and complaining about somebody down south doing things, but actually doing things in my community is hands-on. We can feel proud of what we're doing, and therefore then we feel repurposed in life. And so This stuff, when you're working shoulder to shoulder, as Robert says, or eye to eye, whatever, it's real, like it's physical. It's not virtual. And
how many people, men, make up, sort of an ideal or an average shed?
Most of the sheds are 15 to 25. And then you start getting to a little bit too large for anybody to be able to relate to each other on any one night. But we have sheds who are 150. They meet on all nights of the week. So, and they do all kinds of different activities. Not everybody likes to do woodworking or whatever. So they vary. But the smaller sheds are 5 to 10, and the typical sheds are 20 to 25.
One of the challenges is finding space, for sheds.
Oh.
And so, space determines the size of the shed quite often. And also we have, when you're dealing with power tools and other tools, safety is also, prime consideration. So you can't have 150 people in a 1,200 square foot shed. I just wanted to go back to one other point, just to follow up a little bit about what Brian was saying. We forget that men are assets, like a lot of them bring in their own talents. And, sometimes they forget because they haven't been at a shed. But then when they join the shed, all of a sudden, we find out that they can do this, and that. And it develops a lot of confidence and a lot of good feelings in them and so on. We have, for example, in Squamish, a program called the Intergenerational Project. So we have children between 5 years and 11 years old. During July and August, like this is the fifth summer in a row that we've offered this program. And we teach them, basic carpentry skills, how to saw, how to sand, how to nail a hammer, and they put together a little craft piece. For example, a locomotive, axles, wheels, chimney, and they can paint it and they can put their name on the bottom, bring it home. Hey, Dad and Mom, look what I did, and I did it all by myself, those kind of things. But when you see them working together, like the grandfather image with the little 6-year-old child, the joy that it brings to the shedder and the trust relationship that is there. I mean, it's a joy by itself. It's incredible. It's a great, great picture. And boy, does it ever work. And the kids just absolutely love it. We bring them to the shed and we show them how each power tool works. And, they make big noise. They do all kinds of cuttings and that kind of stuff. They really, it's a tremendous thing. And as Brian said, sheds do different things, and community build programs are really, really important. That's one of the, not only can shedders do their own projects, but they're involved in community build projects. Again, just going back to Squamish, we do about 15 to 20 every year. And it's, 3,000 hours of volunteer time for the betterment of the community. And we're just one shed of 170 that does that. recently I was, again, this was in Sutton, the Sutton Men's Shed in Quebec. They had a repair cafe, which was quite interesting. And so they had the repair cafe in the Legion Hall. The Legion allowed them to bring all their, equipment and tools and all that. And what happened was the clients would come in, they would register their name at the front desk, and the guy would ask them, well, what's wrong? I got to get my lamp fixed, or my furniture needs repair, or something is not where my radio is not working. And so he would write down, give him a piece of paper, and there would be tables all over, to do different things. So if you had an electrical problem, you'd go to table 6. If you had a furniture problem, you go to table 4, and on and on. And so people would come in and, they get registered, and then the table would say, yes, we can fix that. And then if they could fix it, they would fix it. And, he would go back to the registration desk and return the certificate saying that it was completed. And then he would take out of his pocket, because they asked for a donation. So he puts the money in a little box, and the registrar, I guess, he rings a bell. That somebody made a donation, and all the shedders get up and clap.
That's great.
It was really, really wonderful to see the camaraderie and the spirit. And in 2 hours, they made like $300, and satisfied 15 or different, members from the community who otherwise would have, paid a lot of money to get this thing fixed. So sheds are just absolutely wonderful. They do many, many great things, not only for sheds, but for their communities.
So based on what you guys have both shared with us, I think, is that shed effect. I guess I've read that many times about the shed effect. So this sounds exactly like the outcomes of the effect of doing the community outreach and the impact that, that occurs from all of these great contributions. And I love the idea of the grandparents. So some younger people don't have grandparents that are around. So if they're able to come, that intergenerational connection that you just talked about, Robert, I think is vital for younger folks as well. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask how you're funded, because if you have to find space, you probably have to pay.
Yes.
For it.
Yeah.
And you have an executive director, you need to give them something. Yeah.
So, all my life as an adult, in my adult life as a volunteer, and all of you probably know that to get money, you have to write grants, and you write grants, and you write grants, and more grants, to sustain your organization. Well, this one time, so why I'm saying that is because one time I was doing a little presentation on men's shed at the Summit on Aging in Vancouver. And after the presentation, a lady came up to me and said, "Oh, I'd like to talk to you about men's sheds." And so I said, "Okay, how much time do you have?" She said, "I don't have a lot of time, but why don't we schedule an interview?" So we did. So we had an hour and a half interview, Zoom interview. And she told me, "Okay, if you had all the resources that you needed, what would your vision of men's sheds be? How do you see that in 5 years, 10 years, and so on?" So we went into that and so on. And I say, "Why are you asking all these questions?" She said, "Because we're quite interested in supporting men's sheds. We have an idea of what it can accomplish. And, we think our trustees would like to invest money in men's shed." I said, "Oh, wow." And I said, "Well, what's the next step then?" She said, "Write a concept paper, 2 pages, no longer. What would some of your deliverables, some of the resources, and some timelines over 3 years." And so, we went back and did that. And so, Walton Trust in Toronto were the generous funders of Men's Sheds Canada, and they came to us. We did not go to them. Can you believe they picked us? And they also are very much involved in early childhood development and the environment. So all their monies, are directed in those 3 streams, but Men's Shed is one of them. And how blessed we are to find people who really believe in men's sheds, and I think they had a, good understanding of what's taking place around the world. As I said, there are more than 3,000 sheds in 17 countries, and they had an association with the United Kingdom Men's Shed Association. They're also funding them, and so they wanted a big men's shed program in Canada, and they gave it to us. So we're very much supported. But so we're 2.5 years into that 5-year program, funding program.
So, I'll provide you another answer, Sherry. We use a large portion of that money to support sheds.
Yeah.
So from the beginning and right through to their life cycle. So we offer small grants to men who want to start a shed. They need to get whatever it is they need, whether it's the coffee pot and the coffee, or whether they need to rent a small space or they need to put out posters. We'll provide a small grant to 2+ guys or some sponsors to actually start a shed and get them going. Once they're going for 6 months or so, they qualify for a bigger grant, a capacity building grant. So they can actually get going, get in whatever direction they want to be. And if they're serious enough to register as a not-for-profit or a society, then we take them and we want to support them. And so we get them over the hump. We can't afford to support 170 sheds every year, but we can support them when they want to get going and become sustainable. So we use that funding to help them get going. And so those are grants, and we expect them to then, not only are they building their capacity to make money, but they're also building their capacity to ask for more grants elsewhere, to do fundraising, to become a successful entity. So we're using a lot of that funding to support sheds on the ground.
And it's such a unique program, right? In terms of, we don't hear, I mean, my work, we've talked about many programs, but for focus just on older men, there's not a lot of programs that just have that focus. So this is amazing work. I mean, there's programs out there, but this is a unique program to bring together older men across the country. So, and you're being able to support that process, because I'm thinking of my own, area. I'm thinking, we should have, they're a small rural area, and it would be so beneficial to the men in my community. And just talking to colleagues, and she's like, yeah, my partners, we should get these started. And knowing that there's somebody there to help you through is, instead of doing it by yourself, is really helpful. So then people say, well, maybe I could start that. And there is somebody to walk me through what those steps are. It might be a little bit of seed money to get it going. And then, once they get more confident and understand, then they can go off on their own kind of thing and look for more money to sustain the work.
That's my job.
But then this is given that
I'm not a volunteer, as Robert said. My job is to help men start sheds. So we provide the support, and we provide ongoing support, because this is not easy. And so, but I'm here I'm paid to do this, and there's another aspect that once a shed gets started, they support other guys near them to start a shed. But there's so much of province of Canada, as Robert has said, that is still undeveloped in terms of, there's men out there and they don't even know about men's sheds. So we have to create that awareness.
But there are also many men who live in the more rural areas.
Yeah.
And those who don't have access to transportation. Right. So is there any mention of creating a hybrid of an online men's shed in the future that might build community in a different way?
We have one that's been ongoing that I was a part of since COVID, because that's where we had to go during COVID.
Yeah.
In Edmonton, we had the downtown men's shed, who we used to meet downtown, and then all of a sudden we couldn't meet anymore. So we kept it going. And that's the one that has kept going through all this time over the past years. And so it isn't an option. It is an option. And I'm exploring one with a guy in Montreal who wants to start one, focusing on art and doing art virtually and checking in once a week. So that is an option, and would be wonderful to make it accessible to men who are in remote areas. It has the disadvantage of, it's not shoulder to shoulder. It's face on. So men, this is a bit more confrontational when you're looking face on than when you're working shoulder to shoulder. And so the model it's a tough fit. And yet there's all those guys up in the northern part of this country who are not connected. And, so we're thinking about it and we're working towards it.
But we also offer webinars, and, Brian hosts a cross-country checkup, on different topics that might be of interest to any shedders, whether they're rural, urban, or otherwise, So we do a lot of communication with shedders right across Canada on various topics throughout the year.
Well, that just sort of brings me to the circling back to the shed effect is, I know you've been planning for this coming awareness day of International Men's Day on November 19th. Can you tell us a little bit about what Men's Sheds Canada is doing or participating to recognize that day?
Sure. I can say a few words about it. Well, we want to promote, men as an asset, as contributors to the betterment of their communities. We want to focus on men, period, one day a year. And I think it's been going on for quite a few years now, but we've never, as a national organization, we've not celebrated that. And it's come to our attention that it's just absolutely an ideal event for us to generate, publicity and promotion about men's sheds and the importance and value of men's sheds, because it does save lives, it does change lives, and we want to get that message across to as many people as possible. We got some really wonderful speakers. It's a virtual event. It's the first time that we're trying, and I'm hoping that we will continue that on an annual basis. But everybody's welcome. We're going to be advertising it through, I'm not sure where, but our communication person, our communication lead, I'm sure she's going to advertise the living heck out of it to make sure
I've seen some stuff already.
You have it. Well, I'm not surprised.
Social media.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. No, she's going to go. Yeah, and we recently got into the media distribution service. We purchased that, so we're going to go right across the country promoting this event and all future events, so that we could generate more interest in mention. We want to make it a household name,
Yes.
And again, as I said, we're just young, evolving. We got a long way to go, but eventually, I'm hoping that that's what's going to happen. That's the object of our exercise.
Yeah, and I think it's a great day to do that, and I know that we'll be promoting it on our social media as well. Brian, you're just going to say something?
Well, I just want to add to that. So it's all about community impact. So the sheds who are now in place and they're so proud of the work they do in the community, that's one side of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's all the other communities who don't yet have a shed in their community. We want to say, why not? Because this is a benefit. We have these positive male role models who are willing, if you just give them an opportunity. Why don't you have a men's shed in your community? And so when we do social media, we don't necessarily target it at the older guys because they don't pay it, but women are our biggest advocates, especially community services who offer in their communities programs all the time, and the women show up and the men don't. We're the solution, and we're a proven solution, and that the communities who now have us have a men's shed in their community are so appreciative. When we held a barbecue for my community here, and they came in and they said, "What?" It was a thank you barbecue, and they said, "For all the stuff you do in the community, and you're thanking us." They couldn't believe it, but it's such a good relationship to have, and we're so proud of being part of the community instead of being hidden. So, part of this is about bragging that we're doing community work now, and part of it is saying, if you have a community without a men's shed, why don't you?
Do you have a contact on your website or some way that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, at mensshedscanada.ca. That's where you find all of our information, and there's a place to ask questions. It goes to info@mensshedscanada.ca, and that comes to me and a few other people, and we answer the question within 24 hours. And if you want to start a shed, if you want to know where there are sheds, if you want to know what it takes, if you want to send your partner, your brother, your kid, your dad, we field all those questions, and we'll do a couple of things. We'll refer you to the nearest shed. That's one thing that we'll do. Or if you want to start a shed, we'll walk you through it, because I've done it. So it's not rocket science. You show up at a place with a coffee pot and say, "I'm going to be here every week." That's how you start a shed. So we're here to help. Yes.
That's great. Are you involved in any research to, because I know, Robert, you just mentioned about measuring impact and going to government to show, demonstrate the evidence that this is making a change, especially when we talk about Shedison, right? And so are you involved in any research to evaluate the impact that this is having on men's health and the social, not only the physical health, but the social benefits that are contributing to this, to not only get sustained funding maybe through other government programs, but also changing policy or practice? So we hear about social prescribing. This is a great opportunity to say, if a gentleman goes to their doctor and is, needs to feel that connectedness, this is a great opportunity for them to say, hey, try this out, right? So there's so many opportunities. So are you involved in any of that kind of research to get some metrics on the work that you're doing?
Well, we've established a research and advocacy committee, of the board, and we are affiliated with 6, probably some of the best universities in Canada, including, those that specialize in gerontology. So we are working with them, and Dr. Raza, who you've mentioned just earlier, we're working with him on a project right now. Again, and what we're focusing on is we want to have a better understanding in a Canadian context, because there's a lot of research done in Great Britain and Scotland and so on, but we need to understand it in a Canadian context. So what is the impact of sheds on the community, on its members, and on health? Does a shed really make a difference health-wise to men? And so we have to document that, and we have to have really reliable and capable research scientists to make sure that when we make a case, that all our authors are really credible, that the statistics are credible, and so on and so on. So if hopefully one day we will approach the federal government with those kind of stats and with that kind of a case to make with them to provide permanent funding for men's sheds across Canada, or some program like that. So absolutely, we're deeply involved in research, and we do have a compendium of research articles on our website, so we know what's going on around the world, and we know we don't want to duplicate a lot of things, but again, the important thing is it's got to be done in a Canadian context, so that the people that are going to provide us with funds will understand this happens in Canada, this is the impact on Canadians, and so on. So yeah, we're doing that. And on social prescription, I think there are sheds that are involved in social prescription. I know Connie Newman from Manitoba, she's got about 120 connectors throughout the province who are always seem to be in touch with the various sheds in that province. And you're right, health practitioners do refer men sometimes to sheds for social intervention instead of medical intervention, and that's really, really critical. But we have to be very careful about who we allow to come into the shed, because don't forget, a lot of the shedders are not properly qualified. If an incident happens, how are you going to deal with a medical issue? So we got to be very careful about who we admit, the condition that they have, so that we are, responsible and are able to respond accordingly. We don't want to have any accidents or do the wrong thing and so on. Mind you, a lot of sheds, they do have doctors as shedders. For example, in ours, we have 2. And we also have a priest in case something bad happens.
Well, that's awesome.
And so on. So, no, we got to be careful about that. But it's a welcoming program. We have to look into it a little bit more and understand better and put parameters around it so that, it's a win-win for both people coming in and for the shed itself.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I think everybody who will be listening to this is going to be captivated by it, I'm sure. And but what we do at the end of all of this is part of a series called Aging Vibrantly. So our last question for you is, what advice would you give to empower someone, a senior, to age vibrantly? Do you have any advice?
We could start with Brian, maybe.
Well, okay. I'll just say get together with some other, so that we're about men's sheds. And I know what I can do alone. I have so much more fun doing it with other men. So when I'm aging vibrantly, I'm with a bunch of guys doing something we really enjoy, and that's of value and we can brag about. And working with younger people is one of those things. So I would say living vibrantly means working together with other guys and taking a bit of a leap of faith. Stepping through the door is an act of courage, and you probably enjoy what you find because we're a group of regular guys. And if I was talking to any one individual, I'd say we don't have anybody like you in our shed. We need you.
That's awesome. That's great. That's great advice. And Robert?
Well, it's not for nothing that the United Nations declared social isolation as a global epidemic. I mean, it's common around the whole world, including, ours, unfortunately. And I think what is really, really important is, what Brian said. You can't be socially isolated. You gotta be with friends. You have to see. You've got to make friends, live life. Because life is very, very short, as we all know, and it passes by very quickly, and you can get sick and so on very quickly and so on. So I think having fun, as much fun as you possibly can, in the state that you are, but don't do it alone. Don't socially isolate yourself. Don't be lonely, because the opposite effect is going to happen. And if you're not well, there are steps that you can take that you might not beat the illness, but you can control it and still have the kind of life that you should probably have. And as Brian said, a lot of the men are in the fourth quarter of their lives, and many of them are not well. Many of them are well. I mean, they're really good, and they have lots to offer. And it's nice to hang out somebody who's not as well with somebody who's well, and sort of commiserate together and work together, and make it a good situation for both.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that informative, advice, and for others, and for sharing all your wealth of knowledge about men's sheds and your leadership across the country to expand their program, to get more men involved in different communities across, their different regions. I encourage our listeners to reach out to you to learn more about it. Contact Brian. He's the contact guy. And thank you again for just sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. We love to talk about men's sheds.
Oh, yeah. We could go for another hour, but so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Robert and Brian, for joining the Aging Vibrantly podcast today. I know I've learned so much about men's sheds and the wealth of benefits and positive impacts it's having in older men's lives. I know I'm going to be talking to my neighbors and friends about the Men's Sheds program. I encourage all of our listeners to become more knowledgeable about men's sheds and to take a moment to visit menshedscanada.ca to find a shed in the area you reside, or how you can start a shed in your local community. Let's all get involved in supporting shedders and promoting the shed effect and combating isolation and loneliness among older men. What are you waiting for? Just a reminder, you can find resources and information about Men's Sheds Canada mentioned today in the show notes. And if you're looking for more information for yourself, friends, or a family member you're concerned about that may be vulnerable or at risk of mistreatment, please visit our website at eapon.ca, where you'll find fact sheets and educational materials that are free to download. Or call our office to speak to a consultant for assistance at 1-833-916-6728. Aging Vibrantly, Conversations to Empower Seniors is hosted by Rayanne Rideout, produced by Lisa Whitfield, and edited by Todd Miller of the Podcast Experts. Original music was produced by Redpath Audio. We want to thank Help Age Canada for their financial support to produce this season's podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Aging Vibrantly wherever you get your podcast. If you prefer to watch the episode interviews, full episodes are posted on Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario's YouTube channel, so be sure to check us out. We have also launched a new listener feedback survey. We really want to hear your comments and suggestions. Your opinion matters to us, so please take a moment to fill out our listener survey. You'll find that link in the show notes below. Until next time, stay vibrant.